The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on Penelope Fairchild as she trudged along the dusty Montana trail, her once white cotton blouse now clinging to her skin with perspiration. The year was 1878, and the 22-year-old schoolteacher had made the foolish decision to travel from Miles City to her new teaching post in the neighboring settlement on foot, grossly underestimating both the distance and the unforgiving summer heat of the Montana Territory. Penelope's vision began to blur as dark spots danced before her eyes. Her canteen had run dry hours ago, and her throat felt like sandpaper. The heavy carpetbag containing her meager possessions seemed to grow heavier with each step. She tried to focus on the horizon, where heat waves shimmered above the golden prairie grass, distorting her view of the mountains beyond. Just a bit further, she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. The words had scarcely left her parched lips when her knees buckled beneath her. The world tilted violently as she collapsed onto the sun-baked earth, consciousness slipping away like water through cupped hands. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when she became vaguely aware of a shadow falling across her face, blocking the brutal sun. Through half-lidded eyes, she glimpsed a tall figure dismounting from a horse, the jingle of spurs accompanying his movements. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" a deep voice called out, sounding distant despite its proximity. Penelope tried to respond, but her tongue felt swollen and useless in her mouth. Strong arms gently turned her over, and she found herself looking up at a weathered face partially obscured by the brim of a dusty Stetson. Kind eyes the color of a summer storm assessed her with concern. "You've got heatstroke, madam," the stranger said, his voice low and calm. He quickly removed his own coat, fashioning a makeshift shelter by propping it up with his rifle and a nearby bush, creating a patch of blessed shade. With expert efficiency, he positioned her beneath it. "Rest as long as needed," he said, uncorking his own canteen and bringing it to her lips. "Small sips now, don't want to shock your system." The water tasted sweeter than any nectar as it trickled down her parched throat. Penelope managed to whisper a hoarse "thank you" before exhaustion claimed her once more. When she next awoke, the punishing heat of midday had given way to the softer warmth of late afternoon. She was still beneath the improvised shelter, but now a damp cloth rested on her forehead. The stranger sat nearby, whittling a piece of wood with a pocket knife, his horse grazing contentedly a few paces away. "You're awake," he observed, setting aside his carving. "How are you feeling, madam?" "Better, I think," Penelope managed, her voice still raspy but stronger. "I'm Penelope Fairchild. I can't thank you enough for your kindness, Mr. Thomas McCreedy," he replied, tipping his hat slightly. "Most folks just call me Tucker, and there's no need for thanks. Couldn't rightly leave someone in distress out here alone." As her vision cleared, Penelope could now see him properly. Tucker McCreedy was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the open sky. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with laugh lines at the corners of his gray eyes and a strong jaw softened by a neatly trimmed beard that was a shade darker than his light brown hair. "What in heaven's name are you doing out here alone, Miss Fairchild?" he asked, refilling the canteen from a larger water skin. "This trail's dangerous enough for a seasoned rider, let alone a lady on foot." "I'm the new schoolteacher," she explained, slowly sitting up with his assistants, "for Cottonwood Creek. I was told in Miles City it was only a short journey and I couldn't afford to hire transportation." Tucker's expression darkened. "Whoever told you that was either a fool or playing a cruel joke. Cottonwood Creek's a good 15 miles from where we are now, and that's after you've already come 5 from Miles City." Penelope's heart sank. 15 more miles. I'll never make it by nightfall." "You won't be making it at all today," Tucker said firmly. "You need rest and plenty of water." "Heatstroke's nothing to trifle with," he gestured toward the western horizon. "I've got a small camp set up by the creek about a mile from here. If you're willing to trust me, I can take you there for the night, get some food in you, and escort you to Cottonwood Creek in the morning." Penelope hesitated. Her father had raised her to be cautious, particularly around unknown men, but she knew she had little choice. Besides, if Tucker had wanted to harm her, he'd had ample opportunity while she was unconscious. "I would be most grateful, Mr. McCreedy," she said finally. "Tucker," he corrected with a small smile. "Mr. McCreedy was my father and a considerably less pleasant man." After helping her to her feet, Tucker gathered his makeshift shelter and secured her carpetbag to his saddle. Then, with surprising gentleness for a man of his size, he lifted Penelope onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold steady now," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as one arm circled her waist to keep her secure. "Maverick here's gentle, but you're still weak." The closeness was improper, Penelope knew, but as they set off toward his camp, she found herself grateful for the support. The rhythmic motion of the horse beneath them and the solid presence of Tucker at her back lulled her into a state of drowsy security she hadn't felt since leaving her home in Boston months before. True to his word, Tucker's camp was modest but well established beside a small creek that cut through the prairie. A simple canvas tent was pitched beneath the shade of one of the few trees dotting the landscape, and the remains of a morning fire sat in a ring of stones. "It's not much," Tucker said as he helped her down from the horse, "but it's home enough when I'm on the trail." "Are you a cowboy?" Penelope asked, watching as he efficiently tended to Maverick, removing the saddle and brushing the horse down. Tucker's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Among other things. I do some cattle driving for the Double R Ranch when they need extra hands, but mostly I work as a scout and guide. The Army contracts me sometimes, and other times I help settlers find their way to their homesteads." While he spoke, he rekindled the fire and set a pot of coffee to brew. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and to Penelope's surprise, a few fresh apples. "Not exactly a feast," he apologized, offering her the food, "but it'll put strength back in you." The simple meal tasted better than any fine dining she'd experienced in Boston. As they ate, the sun began to set, painting the vast Montana sky in breathtaking strokes of orange, pink, and purple that gradually deepened to indigo. "It's beautiful," Penelope whispered, gazing at the spectacle. "I've never seen anything like it." Tucker nodded, his eyes reflecting the dying light of the sunset. "That's why I could never settle for city life. The sky out here." He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "It's honest, I suppose, vast and true in a way people rarely are." There was something in his voice, a hint of old pain perhaps, that made Penelope curious about his past, but she didn't press. Instead, she told him about herself, about growing up in Boston, about losing her parents to influenza 2 years prior, and about her decision to accept a teaching position in the Montana Territory. "It was either this or marry my father's business associate," she admitted. "A man 30 years my senior who viewed me as little more than another acquisition." Tucker's jaw tightened at that. "Then I'd say you made the right choice, Miss Fairchild, though perhaps you could have picked somewhere a bit less wild for your fresh start." "Please call me Penelope," she said, smiling, "and I wanted somewhere different, somewhere where what matters is who you are, not who your family was." As night fully descended, Tucker insisted she take the tent while he slept outside by the fire. Despite her protests that she couldn't displace him from his own shelter, he was adamant. "I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count," he assured her. "One more won't trouble me." Exhausted from her ordeal, Penelope didn't argue further. The tent was small but clean, with a bedroll that smelled of pine and open air. As she lay down, listening to the gentle sounds of the creek and the occasional shifting of Tucker as he settled by the fire, Penelope reflected on how different this night was from what she had expected. Instead of arriving at her new post, prepared to begin her duties as educator, she was camping in the wilderness with a man she'd just met. Strangely, though, she felt no fear. There was something about Tucker McCreedy that inspired trust, a steadiness in his manner, a quiet strength that had nothing to do with his physical capabilities. As sleep claimed her, she wondered what more she might learn about him on their journey tomorrow. Morning came with the melodious calls of meadowlarks and the earthy aroma of coffee brewing over a fresh fire. Penelope emerged from the tent to find Tucker already up, cooking something that smelled deliciously like flapjacks in a small skillet. "Good morning," he greeted, looking up from his task. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," she admitted, running a hand through her tousled auburn hair, wishing she had a proper brush. She must look a fright after yesterday's ordeal. If Tucker noticed her disheveled appearance, he gave no indication. Instead, he handed her a tin plate with several golden brown flapjacks. "Eat up. We've got a fair piece to ride today." As they breakfasted, Tucker explained the route they would take to Cottonwood Creek and what Penelope could expect from the small settlement. "It's growing, but it's still rough around the edges. The fact they've hired a schoolteacher is a good sign, though. Means enough families have settled to need one." "What do you know of the town?" Penelope asked, eager for any information about her new home. "It's built around the lumber mill and a few cattle operations," Tucker replied. "Decent folk for the most part, though like anywhere, it has its share of troublemakers. The sheriff, Amos Jenkins, is a fair man if a bit slow to act sometimes. The general store's run by a widow, Mrs. Holloway, who'll likely take you under her wing." After breakfast, they packed up camp efficiently. Tucker showed remarkable consideration, turning his back while Penelope straightened her clothing and attempted to make herself presentable, then helping her onto Maverick before mounting behind her once more. The ride to Cottonwood Creek was more pleasant than Penelope could have anticipated. The morning was cooler, and the landscape, which had seemed so hostile yesterday, now revealed its beauty: rolling hills covered in prairie grass that waved like a golden sea in the gentle breeze, punctuated by stands of cottonwoods and aspens that provided welcome shade. Tucker proved to be knowledgeable about the land, pointing out various plants and wildlife, explaining which were useful for medicine or food and which to avoid. He told her about the indigenous peoples who had lived on these lands for generations before white settlers arrived, speaking with a respect that Penelope found refreshing compared to the dismissive attitudes she'd encountered elsewhere. "You seem to know a great deal about the native tribes," she observed after he explained the significance of a particular landmark to the Crow people. Tucker was quiet for a moment before responding. "I spent some time with them as a young man. After the war, the Civil War, that is, I was lost, I suppose, wandered north and west until I ended up in Crow territory. They could have killed me, but instead they took me in for a winter. Taught me a lot about surviving out here and even more about what it means to be part of a community." "You fought in the war?" Penelope asked softly, surprised. He didn't seem old enough, but then again, many had enlisted when very young. "I was 16 when I joined up with the Union Army," Tucker confirmed, his voice taking on a distant quality. "Saw things no boy should see. When it ended, I couldn't go back home to Kentucky. Too many ghosts." Penelope didn't push for more details, sensing the weight of memories he carried. Instead, she shared more about her own life, her love of literature, her hope to instill a passion for learning in her future students, and her determination to prove that a woman could make her own way in the world. "My father wanted me to have an education," she explained. "He believed women were just as capable as men, intellectually speaking. My mother thought he was filling my head with impractical ideas, but she never stopped him from letting me study alongside my brothers." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Tucker remarked. "He was," Penelope agreed, a hint of sadness coloring her voice. "I miss him terribly." As midday approached, they crested a hill and Tucker pointed ahead. "There it is, Cottonwood Creek." The settlement was larger than Penelope had expected, with perhaps 40 or 50 buildings arranged along what appeared to be a main street, with smaller lanes branching off. The promised lumber mill was visible at one end of town, while the other faded into scattered homesteads. A church steeple and what she assumed was the schoolhouse stood near the center. "It's bigger than I thought it would be," she admitted. "Been growing fast these last few years," Tucker explained. The railroad coming through 15 miles south at Miles City brought a lot of new settlers to the area. As they rode into town, Penelope became acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. A woman riding double with a man was bound to raise eyebrows, and she felt a flush creeping up her neck at the thought of what kind of first impression she was making. Tucker seemed to sense her discomfort. Don't worry about them, he murmured. Small towns run on gossip, but they forget quick enough when something more interesting comes along. He guided Maverick directly to a 2-story building with a sign identifying it as the town's only hotel, the Cottonwood Inn. After helping Penelope dismount, Tucker tied his horse to the hitching post and escorted her inside. The hotel's lobby was modest but clean, with a polished wooden counter and a few chairs scattered about. A portly man with an impressive mustache looked up from his ledger as they entered. "Tucker McCreedy," the man exclaimed. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Thought you were heading up to Fort Benton." "Change of plans, George," Tucker replied, nodding toward Penelope. "Found Miss Fairchild here on the trail yesterday, suffering from heatstroke. She's your new schoolteacher." George's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Miss Fairchild, we were expecting you yesterday. When you didn't arrive, the school board was considering sending a search party." "I'm afraid I greatly underestimated the journey from Miles City," Penelope admitted. "If not for Mr. McCreedy's intervention, I might still be lying on that trail," George shook his head. "Lucky thing Tucker came along when he did. Most folks know better than to travel that stretch without a horse and proper supplies." He grabbed a key from the wall behind him. "We've arranged a room for you here until more permanent accommodations can be sorted. The school board will cover your first week." Penelope felt a wave of relief. One of her biggest concerns had been where she would stay upon arrival. "That's very kind, thank you." As George continued explaining local arrangements, that she should meet with the school board chairman, Mr. Peterson, as soon as possible, and that the school term was set to begin in 2 weeks, Penelope was aware of Tucker quietly excusing himself. By the time George finished his explanation and handed her the key, Tucker had already stepped outside. A strange sense of loss swept through her at his departure. It was foolish, she knew. They were strangers who had shared less than a day together, yet she felt an inexplicable connection to this quiet, thoughtful man who had quite possibly saved her life. "Mr. McCreedy seems like a good man," she commented as George showed her to her room. "Salt of the earth," George agreed. "Known him for 5 years now, ever since he started guiding in these parts. Keeps to himself mostly, but there isn't a more reliable man in the territory when trouble comes calling." After settling into her room, a simple space with a narrow bed, washstand, and small desk, Penelope cleaned up as best she could with the provided basin and pitcher. She changed into her one remaining clean dress, a practical navy blue cotton with white trim, and pinned her hair into a modest chignon. Looking marginally more presentable, she decided to seek out Mr. Peterson, but as she descended the stairs to the lobby, she was surprised to find Tucker waiting, his hat in his hands. "I thought you'd left," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Nearly did," he admitted. "Then I realized I never properly finished the job I started." At her questioning look, he elaborated, "Getting you safely to your destination. Seems to me that includes making sure you're properly settled and that the school board understands you need a day or two of rest before taking up your duties." Penelope felt a rush of gratitude. "That's very thoughtful, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time any further." "No imposition," Tucker assured her. "Besides, I have some business with Peterson myself. He contracts me occasionally to bring supplies up from Miles City for the school." Together, they walked down the main street of Cottonwood Creek. The town was bustling with activity, wagons rumbling past, men in work clothes heading in and out of the saloon, women shopping at the general store, and children playing in the dusty street. Several people called greetings to Tucker, confirming George's assessment of his reputation in the community. The school board chairman's office was attached to the town's only law office. Mr. Peterson turned out to be a severe-looking man in his 50s with spectacles perched on a prominent nose. His initial frown at their arrival quickly transformed into concern when Tucker explained the circumstances of their meeting. "Miss Fairchild, please accept my sincere apologies," Peterson said. "When we corresponded about the position, I should have made arrangements for your transportation from Miles City. It was thoughtless of me to assume you would find your own way, especially in this heat." "The fault is mine as well," Penelope assured him. I should have inquired more thoroughly about the journey. The meeting proceeded smoothly after that. Peterson explained her duties, the expectations of the town, and the progress made in preparing the schoolhouse for the coming term. By the end of their discussion, it was clear that while the town was eager for education, they were somewhat unprepared for the practicalities of running a proper school. "We've ordered books," Peterson said, "but they're delayed. And the schoolhouse itself needs some finishing touches: proper desks, a bell, blackboards." "I can pick up those blackboards from Miles City next week," Tucker offered. "Jenkins at the Mercantile said they'd arrived." Peterson nodded gratefully. "That would be a great help. And perhaps you might show Miss Fairchild around the schoolhouse before you leave town. Give her a sense of what she's working with." Tucker agreed readily, and after concluding their business, he and Penelope walked to the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with large windows and a small bell tower that currently housed no bell. "It's charming," Penelope said, as Tucker unlocked the door and ushered her inside. The room was bare except for a teacher's desk at the front and rough wooden benches instead of proper student desks. The walls were unadorned, the floors recently swept. "It's unfinished is what it is," Tucker replied, but there was no criticism in his tone, only pragmatism. "This town is growing faster than it can build. The families moved here for the mill and the ranches, and now they're realizing they need the trappings of civilization: school, church, proper law." Penelope walked to the front of the room, imagining it filled with students. Despite its Spartan appearance, she could see its potential. "It will be wonderful," she decided. "Once there are children learning here, it won't matter if the desks are fancy or plain." Tucker watched her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You really believe in this, don't you?" "Teaching, I mean?" "With all my heart," she replied honestly. "Education changed my life, opened doors that would have remained closed to me as a woman. I want to give that opportunity to others, especially girls who might otherwise be limited by society's expectations." Something in Tucker's face softened. "I admire that kind of conviction." They spent the next hour exploring the schoolhouse and its small yard, discussing improvements that could be made before classes began. Tucker proved surprisingly knowledgeable about construction, offering practical suggestions for everything from where to hang maps to how to arrange benches for optimal light. "You seem to know a lot about schoolhouses for a man who spends most of his time on the trail," Penelope observed as they finally locked up. Tucker's smile held a hint of melancholy. "My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She taught me at home until I was 12, then at the local school until—" He trailed off, then continued more quietly, "until the war came." The sun was setting by the time they walked back toward the hotel, casting long shadows across the dusty street. The day's conversations had revealed more layers to Tucker McCreedy than Penelope had anticipated: his respect for education, his practical intelligence, his standing in a community that clearly valued his presence despite his transient lifestyle. "Will you be leaving tomorrow?" she asked as they reached the hotel entrance. "That was my plan," Tucker confirmed. "Need to make it to Fort Benton before the end of the month." Penelope nodded, fighting an irrational disappointment. "Then I should thank you properly for everything you've done. You saved my life, Mr. McCreedy." "Tucker," he reminded her gently. "Tucker," she amended with a smile. "If there's ever anything I can do to repay your kindness," he shook his head. "No repayment necessary. Just take care of yourself, Miss Fairchild. Montana's beautiful, but she can be harsh to the unprepared." "I've learned that lesson quite thoroughly," Penelope assured him. "And please continue to call me Penelope." They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Tucker tipped his hat. "Good night then, Penelope. I wish you success with your school." "Good night, Tucker." "Safe travels." As Penelope watched him walk away toward the livery where he'd stabled Maverick for the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching an opportunity slip away, though what kind of opportunity? She couldn't precisely say. The next morning, Penelope rose early, intending to begin familiarizing herself with the town that would be her home for the foreseeable future. As she dressed, she found herself glancing occasionally out her window toward the livery, wondering if Tucker had already departed. After a simple breakfast in the hotel dining room, she set out to explore Cottonwood Creek in daylight. The town was indeed growing rapidly, with signs of construction everywhere. The general store proved to be a treasure trove of necessities, and Mrs. Holloway, the widow who ran it, was exactly as Tucker had described: motherly, informative, and clearly eager to take the new schoolteacher under her wing. "So you're the young lady Tucker McCreedy rescued," Mrs. Holloway said as she helped Penelope select sturdy winter boots that would serve her better than her city shoes. "The whole town's talking about it." Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "I'm afraid I made a rather foolish mistake trying to walk from Miles City." "Wouldn't be the first greenhorn to underestimate this country," Mrs. Holloway said kindly. "Lucky for you Tucker found you when he did. That man's got a sixth sense for people in trouble." "He seems very capable," Penelope agreed, trying to sound neutral despite her curiosity. "Do you know him well?" Mrs. Holloway's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Well enough. He stops in whenever he's passing through, usually to pick up supplies or deliver messages from outlying homesteads. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always ready to lend a hand when needed." She paused, then added casually, "Never seen him take such a personal interest in someone's welfare before, though." Before Penelope could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal her inexplicable interest in the enigmatic guide, the shop door opened and the man himself entered. Tucker stopped short when he saw her, surprise evident on his face. "Penelope," he said, removing his hat. "Good morning." "Good morning, Tucker," she replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. "I thought you might have left already." He shook his head. "Got delayed." "Blacksmith found a crack in one of Maverick's shoes. He's fixing it now, but it'll be another hour or so." Mrs. Holloway bustled forward. "What perfect timing. Miss Fairchild was just about to have me show her the way to the schoolhouse again, but I've got inventory to finish." "Perhaps you could escort her instead, Tucker." Penelope opened her mouth to protest the transparent matchmaking, but Tucker was already nodding. "Happy to if Miss Fairchild doesn't object." "That would be lovely," Penelope found herself saying, Mrs. Holloway's knowing smile making her flush once more. Outside the store, Tucker offered his arm in a gentlemanly gesture that seemed at odds with his frontier appearance, yet somehow entirely natural. "I apologize if Mrs. Holloway was being presumptuous. She likes to involve herself in everyone's business." "It's quite all right," Penelope assured him, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "I'm actually glad for the chance to say a proper goodbye. Yesterday felt unfinished somehow." Tucker's gray eyes studied her face for a moment before he nodded. "I felt the same." They walked toward the schoolhouse, their pace deliberately slow. The morning was pleasant, with a breeze tempering the summer heat that had nearly claimed Penelope's life just 2 days prior. "I've been thinking about your school," Tucker said after a comfortable silence. "It needs more than just blackboards and books." "Oh," Penelope glanced up at him, intrigued. "A school should be welcoming," he continued, his gaze fixed ahead. "When my mother taught, she always made sure there were flowers on her desk and colorful maps on the walls. Said learning happened better in a place that felt alive." The personal revelation touched Penelope deeply. "Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful teacher." "The best," Tucker agreed softly. "She believed education was a sacred trust." "As do I," Penelope said when they reached the schoolhouse. Tucker produced a key. "Peterson gave me this to check measurements for the blackboards," he explained as he unlocked the door. Inside, the morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room still looked bare, but with Tucker beside her, Penelope found it easier to envision it transformed into a place of learning. "I thought about what you might need," Tucker said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Made a list." Surprised, Penelope accepted the paper and unfolded it. In a neat, careful hand, Tucker had written not just obvious items like books and slates, but thoughtful additions. A sturdy water bucket with a ladle, a thermometer to monitor the room temperature, hooks for coats at a height children could reach, a proper teacher's bell. "Tucker, this is incredibly thoughtful," she said, genuinely moved by his consideration. He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Just practical things any school needs. No, Penelope insisted. This shows real care and understanding. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Tucker was quiet for a long moment, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted finally. There's something about you, Penelope Fairchild, something that makes me want to ensure you succeed here. The honesty of his answer disarmed her completely. I'm glad you found me on that trail, she said softly, and not just because you saved my life. Something shifted in the air between them, a tension both exhilarating and frightening. Tucker took a half step closer, then seemed to catch himself. I should go, he said, his voice rougher than before. Maverick's shoe will be fixed by now. Disappointment washed through Penelope, but she nodded, understanding the propriety that governed their interaction. Of course, you have a long journey ahead. They walked back toward town in silence, both seemingly lost in thought. When they reached the livery, Tucker's horse was indeed ready, saddled and waiting with fresh supplies tied behind the saddle. Well, Tucker said awkwardly, I wish you all the best with your school, Penelope. And I wish you safe travels, she replied, trying to smile despite the inexplicable sadness welling inside her. Tucker mounted Maverick with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. Looking down at her, he seemed on the verge of saying something more, but instead he simply tipped his hat. Goodbye, Miss Fairchild. Goodbye, Mr. McCreedy, she responded, reverting to formality as if it might somehow make the parting easier. As she watched him ride out of town, Penelope told herself that her reaction was nothing more than natural gratitude to the man who had saved her life, combined with the nervousness of being alone in a new place. Yet deep down, she knew there was more to it, a connection she'd never felt before, not with any of the polished Boston gentlemen who had courted her. Over the next 2 weeks, Penelope threw herself into preparing for the school term. The town proved welcoming, with many parents bringing their children to meet her before classes officially began. The promised blackboards arrived, delivered not by Tucker but by a freight wagon from Miles City. The disappointment she felt at this was another emotion she tried to dismiss. The school itself gradually took shape under her direction. Several fathers volunteered to build proper desks, while mothers donated curtains for the windows and a rug for the floor. Mrs. Holloway presented her with a handsome brass bell for the tower, and Mr. Peterson arranged for a small cabin to be readied as her permanent residence, just behind the schoolhouse. On the evening before the first day of school, Penelope sat at her teacher's desk, reviewing her lesson plans for the 27 students of varying ages who would soon fill the benches. The room looked transformed clean, organized and adorned with maps, a small bookshelf of donated volumes, and even a vase of late summer wildflowers on her desk. A knock at the open doorway startled her from her contemplation. Looking up, she felt her heart leap at the sight of Tucker McCreedy standing there, hat in hand, looking somewhat trail-worn but very much a welcome sight. "Tucker," she exclaimed, rising quickly. "I didn't expect to see you back in Cottonwood Creek so soon." He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the changes to the schoolhouse before settling on her face. "I finished my business at Fort Benton earlier than expected," he explained. "Thought I'd stop by on my way south to see how your school was coming along." The warmth that spread through Penelope at his words had nothing to do with the late summer heat. "As you can see, it's coming along wonderfully. The whole town has been incredibly supportive." Tucker nodded, moving further into the room to examine the new desks and blackboards. "They've done a fine job," he approved. "This is a proper schoolhouse now." "It's still missing a few things from your list," Penelope said, "but we've managed most of it." Tucker turned back to her, and in his hands, she now noticed he held a package wrapped in brown paper. "Actually, that's part of why I'm here," he said, extending the package toward her. "Found this in Fort Benton and thought your school could use it." Curious, Penelope accepted the package and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a beautiful illustrated atlas, its leather cover embossed with gold lettering, the pages filled with detailed maps of the United States and territories, as well as the broader world. "Tucker, this is exquisite," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth pages. "It must have cost, doesn't matter what it cost," he interrupted gently. "Education's important, you said so yourself." Penelope looked up at him, truly seeing the man before her, not just the rugged exterior of a frontier guide, but the thoughtful, intelligent soul beneath. "Thank you. This is the most perfect gift anyone could have given the school." Tucker's expression softened. "There's something else," he admitted, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small leather pouch and handed it to her. "This is just for you, not the school." Inside the pouch, Penelope found a delicate silver pin shaped like a small book, open to reveal tiny engraved pages. It was simple but beautifully crafted, the kind of tasteful jewelry that would be appropriate for a schoolteacher to wear. "I can't accept this," she said automatically, though her fingers closed protectively around the pin. "You can," Tucker insisted. "It's not valuable enough to be improper, just a trinket I thought you might like. Something to remember that education is a gift that keeps on giving, just like an open book." His words, so clearly heartfelt, moved her deeply. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked again, echoing her question from weeks before. This time, Tucker didn't evade. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since we met," he admitted, his voice low. "I know it makes no sense, we barely know each other, but there's something about you, Penelope Fairchild, that calls to me like nothing ever has before." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Penelope knew that the proper response would be to thank him politely but firmly establish boundaries. Instead, she found herself saying, "I've thought about you too, Tucker, far more than is sensible." The surprise in his eyes gave way to a cautious hope. "I'm not a man with much to offer a lady like yourself," he said carefully. "I don't have land or a proper home. My work takes me away for weeks at a time." "I didn't come west looking for security," Penelope replied. "I came seeking purpose and freedom to define my own path." Tucker took a step closer. "What are you saying, Penelope?" "I'm saying that I'd like the chance to know you better," she answered, her heart pounding. "That whatever this connection is between us, I believe it deserves exploration." For a moment, Tucker simply looked at her as if searching for any sign of doubt. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached out and took her hand in his, the calluses on his palm rough against her smoother skin. "I'd like that very much," he said softly, "but there would be talk." A schoolteacher is expected to be above reproach. Penelope couldn't help but smile. "Then we'll have to be proper about it. Perhaps you could call on me formally, take me to church on Sunday, let the town see that your intentions are honorable." The answering smile that spread across Tucker's face transformed him, erasing the weathered lines and lighting his gray eyes from within. "I believe I could manage that, Miss Fairchild, if you're certain it's what you want." "I am," she assured him, surprised by her own certainty. As promised, Tucker called on Penelope formally the following Sunday, escorting her to the morning church service where the entire town could observe their budding courtship. The curious glances and whispered comments were inevitable, but Penelope found she didn't mind them nearly as much as she might have expected. Over the following months, as autumn painted the cottonwoods gold and then stripped them bare, Tucker established a pattern of returning to Cottonwood Creek between his guiding jobs. Each visit lasted a little longer than the last, and each departure grew more difficult. During his stays, he often helped around the schoolhouse building shelves, repairing the roof before winter set in, constructing a proper woodshed to keep the fuel dry. The children grew to adore Mr. Tucker, especially when he shared stories of his travels or taught them tracking skills during special outdoor lessons. Penelope's own feelings deepened with each conversation they shared. She learned about Tucker's childhood in Kentucky, about his harrowing experiences during the war, about the years of wandering that had eventually led him to Montana. In turn, she shared her own hopes and fears, her determination to prove herself as a teacher, her occasional homesickness for Boston's familiar comforts, her dreams of someday writing educational texts that would make learning accessible to frontier children. By the time the first snows of winter dusted Cottonwood Creek, The entire town had adjusted to the idea of their schoolteacher and the respected guide forming an attachment. Mrs. Holloway took particular delight in their courtship, often inviting them both for Sunday dinner and making thinly veiled comments about how nice it would be to see Penelope properly settled. "You've won them over," Tucker observed one crisp December evening as he walked Penelope home after such a dinner. The street was quiet, the snow crunching beneath their boots, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Have I?" Penelope asked, her hand tucked securely in the crook of his arm. "The whole town," Tucker confirmed. "They've accepted you as their own. Even old Peterson, who I thought might object to your association with someone like me." Penelope stopped walking, turning to face him. "Someone like you mean someone respected, honorable, and kind." "Why would anyone object to that?" Tucker's expression was tender as he reached up to tuck a stray curl back under her bonnet. "You know what I mean, Penelope. I'm not the sort of established man most towns would consider suitable for their schoolteacher." "I don't have a permanent home, steady employment. You have integrity and intelligence," she interrupted firmly. "And you understand me in a way no one else ever has." She hesitated, then added more softly, "Besides, who says you couldn't have those other things if you wanted them?" Something flickered in Tucker's eyes, a longing, perhaps, that he usually kept carefully hidden. "Are you suggesting I should settle down, Miss Fairchild?" he asked, his tone light though his gaze remained intense. "I'm suggesting that you could, Mr. McCreedy," she replied with equal lightness, "if the right opportunity presented itself." They stood there in the snowy street, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. Then Tucker did something he had never done before. Despite months of proper courtship, he leaned down and kissed her, gently and briefly, his lips warm despite the winter chill. When he pulled back, his expression was a mixture of wonder and apprehension, as if he couldn't quite believe his own boldness. "I apologize if that was presumptuous," he said softly. Penelope shook her head, unable to suppress her smile. "It wasn't presumptuous at all. In fact, I think it was long overdue." Tucker's answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "In that case, Miss Fairchild, I hope you won't object if I do it again sometime." "I would be most disappointed if you didn't, Mr. McCreedy," she replied, her heart lighter than it had felt in years. As winter deepened, Tucker found reasons to remain in Cottonwood Creek rather than taking jobs that would lead him away. He helped the town prepare for the harsh Montana winter, assisting with everything from cutting firewood to repairing leaky roofs. When not engaged in such practical tasks, he often spent time at the school, listening to Penelope teach or reading to the younger children while she worked with the older students. On Christmas Eve, the entire town gathered at the church for a special service followed by a community celebration. The schoolchildren performed songs and recitations they had practiced for weeks under Penelope's guidance, their proud parents beaming from the pews. After the performances, as everyone mingled in the church hall enjoying cider and cookies, Tucker drew Penelope aside to a quiet corner. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with a red ribbon, clearly his own handiwork rather than a shopkeeper's. "But we agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow," Penelope protested mildly, though she accepted the package with obvious pleasure. "This one couldn't wait," Tucker explained, an unusual nervousness in his manner. "Go on, open it." Carefully untying the ribbon, Penelope unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers around the edges. "It's lovely, Tucker," she said, running her fingers over the intricate work. "Open the box," he urged softly. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center, modest but undeniably an engagement ring. Penelope's breath caught in her throat as she looked up to find Tucker watching her intently, his usual composure replaced by vulnerable hope. "I know it's not grand," he said quickly, "and I understand if you need time to consider. I haven't even properly asked yet, but I wanted you to know that I've made a decision." He took a deep breath. "I've accepted a permanent position with the territorial government based in Helena." I'll still travel sometimes, but I'll have a home there, a real home that I own, not just a camp by a creek. Tucker, Penelope began, but he shook his head, clearly determined to finish what he'd started. I love you, Penelope Fairchild, he said simply. I think I have since that first day when you opened your eyes under that makeshift shelter and thanked me for water. I never expected to find someone who makes me want to put down roots again, but you've changed everything. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, but they were tears of joy. I love you too, Tucker McCreedy. I don't need time to consider. His face lit with a hope so pure it nearly broke her heart. Is that a yes, then? Yes, she confirmed, laughing through her tears. Yes, I will marry you. Right there in the church hall, with the entire town as inadvertent witnesses, Tucker pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly, no longer the brief, gentle kiss of a courtship's beginning, but the deep, affirming kiss of a future promised and sealed. The applause that erupted around them reminded the couple that they were, in fact, in a very public place. Pulling apart, they found themselves surrounded by smiling townspeople, Mrs. Holloway at the forefront with tears streaming down her plump cheeks. I knew it, she exclaimed, clasping her hands together. I knew from the moment he brought you into town that you two were meant for each other. The celebration that followed was as much for their engagement as for Christmas, with toasts offered and congratulations flowing from all sides. Even Mr. Peterson, typically so proper and reserved, clapped Tucker on the shoulder and declared that the town's loss would be Helena's gain. Though we'll be sorry to lose our schoolteacher, he added with a pointed look at Penelope. I'll finish the school year, she promised. I wouldn't leave the children without a teacher. Later that night, as Tucker walked her home through the gently falling snow, they spoke of their future, of the house in Helena that would become their home, of the possibility that Penelope might open a small school there, or perhaps finally write the educational texts she dreamed of creating. Whatever you want to do, I'll support, Tucker assured her as they stood on the porch of her small cabin. I don't expect you to stop being the remarkable woman you are just because you'll be my wife. Penelope's heart swelled with love for this man who understood her so completely. And I don't expect you to change who you are either, she replied. Your knowledge of this territory, your connection to the land, those are precious gifts. I wouldn't want you confined to a desk job that made you miserable. Tucker smiled, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. This new position will let me use those skills while still having a place to come home to, a home with you. The winter passed in a blur of happiness for Penelope. Despite the bitter cold and occasional blizzards that kept the town snowbound for days at a time, she found joy in her teaching, in planning her future with Tucker, and in becoming ever more a part of Cottonwood Creek's close-knit community. Tucker remained in town through January and February, taking only one short trip to Helena to secure their future home and finalize the details of his new position. When he returned, he brought sketches of the house, a modest but solid 2-story home with a proper study for Penelope and enough room for a family to grow. As March brought the first hints of thaw, wedding preparations began in earnest. They had decided on a spring ceremony, just after the school term ended, giving them time to move to Helena and settle in before Tucker's position officially began in July. Mrs. Holloway took charge of organizing the celebration, declaring that since Penelope had no family present, the entire town would stand in their place. The women of Cottonwood Creek gathered regularly to help Penelope sew her wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk ordered specially from Miles City, and to plan the feast that would follow the ceremony. April brought an unexpected gift when a letter arrived from Boston, a response to the announcement Penelope had sent to her brother James. Not only did he express his delight at her news, but he also promised to attend the wedding, bringing with him several cherished family heirlooms their mother had always intended for Penelope's trousseau. I can't believe he's coming all this way, Penelope said wonderingly as she and Tucker sat on the schoolhouse steps after classes one afternoon, reading the letter together. We haven't seen each other in nearly 2 years. Tucker squeezed her hand gently. Family should be together for important moments. I'm glad you'll have someone from your past here to see your future begin. The last weeks of school passed in a flurry of activity. Penelope worked diligently to ensure her students would be prepared for the next teacher, creating detailed records of each child's progress and capabilities. The school board, meanwhile, began interviewing candidates to replace her, promising to seek someone who would maintain the high standards she had established. May arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the prairie, and the final preparations for both the end of the school term and the wedding. James Fairchild arrived a week before the ceremony, bringing not only the promised family heirlooms, but also heartwarming news from Boston old friends who sent their best wishes, updates on childhood acquaintances, and reassurances that their parents would have wholeheartedly approved of Penelope's chosen path. James and Tucker took to each other immediately, despite their outwardly different backgrounds. James, a successful Boston attorney, found in Tucker a man of substance whose knowledge and integrity commanded respect regardless of formal education. For his part, Tucker appreciated James's obvious care for his sister and his willingness to embrace the frontier lifestyle during his visit. On the last day of the school term, Penelope's students surprised her with a handmade quilt, each square carefully stitched by a different child or family, creating a patchwork of memories from her time in Cottonwood Creek. The gift brought tears to her eyes as she realized how deeply connected she had become to this community that had welcomed her less than a year before. Their wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect late May morning with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. The entire town had turned out, filling the small church to capacity and spilling onto the grounds outside where additional benches had been arranged. Penelope stood in a side room of the church, her brother beside her, wearing their mother's pearl earrings and the wedding gown the town's women had helped her create. Her hands trembled slightly as James offered his arm. "Ready, Pen?" He asked softly, using the childhood nickname only he ever used. She nodded, her heart too full for words. As the church doors opened and the gathered townspeople rose to their feet, Penelope's eyes found Tucker immediately. He stood at the altar, more formally dressed than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed. But it was the expression on his face that took her breath away, a look of such profound love and wonder that it seemed to illuminate him from within. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. They had written their own vows, simple and heartfelt promises to stand by each other through whatever life might bring. When Tucker slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were as steady as they had been the day he offered her water on that sun-baked trail where their story began. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared was a promise, a beginning, and a homecoming all at once. As they turned to face the congregation, now officially Mr. and Mrs. McCreedy, the cheers and applause that erupted seemed to Penelope like the perfect soundtrack to the happiest moment of her life. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up in the town square, laden with food contributed by every family. There was dancing to fiddle music, speeches both eloquent and heartfelt, and enough well wishes to last a lifetime. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Tucker led Penelope away from the festivities to a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree at the edge of town. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they gazed out at the rolling prairie that had brought them together. "Completely," she assured him, leaning back against his chest. "I never imagined when I stepped off that stagecoach in Miles City that I would find not just a purpose, but also the love of my life." Tucker's laugh rumbled through his chest against her back. "And I never imagined when I spotted a collapsed figure on the trail that I was meeting my future wife. I'm rather glad I fainted from heatstroke, all things considered," Penelope said with a smile, turning in his arms to face him. "I'm glad I was there to shade you," Tucker replied, his expression growing serious. And I meant what I said that day. You can rest as long as needed. Whatever life brings us, Penelope, I'll be there to offer shelter when you need it. And I'll be there to offer the same to you," she promised. That's what partnership means, isn't it? Supporting each other through sun and storm alike. As the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky, they sealed this new promise with a kiss that held all the hope and love of their shared future, a future born from a chance encounter on a sun-baked trail, and nurtured by the honest connection of two souls who recognized in each other the home they had both been seeking. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges to Tucker and Penelope McCreedy as they built their life together in Helena. Tucker's position with the territorial government proved to be the perfect use of his skills, allowing him to guide survey parties, assist with treaty negotiations, and help new settlers find suitable land while still having a permanent base with his wife. Penelope, meanwhile, established a small school for children whose farms were too remote for regular attendance at the town schools. She also began writing the educational texts she had long envisioned, creating practical lessons that incorporated frontier knowledge alongside traditional subjects. Her first book, Prairie Schoolhouse: Practical Education for Frontier Children, was published in 1883 and quickly became popular throughout the Western Territories. Their family grew with the birth of their son, James Thomas McCreedy, in 1880, followed by twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, in 1882. Their home became known for its open door, welcoming travelers, newcomers to the territory, and frequent visits from their friends in Cottonwood Creek. Each summer, they made a special journey back to the small town that had witnessed the beginning of their love story. Tucker would point out to their children the exact spot on the trail where he had found their mother suffering from heatstroke, and Penelope would show them the schoolhouse where she had taught before they were born. "And right here," Tucker would always say, creating shade with his hat just as he had done years before, "is where I told your mother to rest as long as needed. And I've been resting in his shade ever since," Penelope would add with a smile, reaching for her husband's hand. As they grew older, the story became a cherished family legend, a reminder that love can begin in the most unexpected circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest journeys start with a simple act of kindness on a sun-drenched trail in the vast Montana wilderness.